Elen, Scylla, Lumen, Omen Tielvo. Today I bring to you all the tale of the Fall of Gondolin. Our tale begins in 472 of the First Age in Dorlomen. Tuor, the brother of Hurin, marries Rhiann, and soon the two conceive a son. Also in that year, the Nirnaeth Arnoidiad was fought, and Tuor would go forth to battle, leaving the 2-month pregnant Rhiann. The Nirnaeth turned ill for the free peoples, as the Elves were scattered, but Hurin and Tuor would lead a valiant last stand to buy time for High King Torgon of the Noldor to escape back to Gondolin. In that stand, Tuor would be slain with an arrow to the eye. No news would come to Dorlomen, so Rhiann went forth into the wild to find Tuor. As the time grew close to winter, Rhiann in the wilderness alone would have perished, but a small band of elves came to her, and taking her to their hideout, where she would give birth to Tuor. She would then wish to go out and find Tuor, and one of the elves, Anile, told Rhiann that Tuor was slain in the last stand of the men of Hador. Rhiann then left Tuor in the care of Anile as she went to Hoth in Dengen, where the bodies of the fallen lay, and there in grief she died, joining Tuor beyond the world. Tuor would grow up under the tutelage of the Grey Elves, and they lived hidden in the caves of Androth, away from the eyes of the forces of Morgoth. Tuor would in his early years wish to avenge the woes of his people in Dorlomen, but Anile would forbid this, saying, quote, "Far hence I deem your doom lies, Tuor, son of Tuor, and this land shall not be freed from the shadow of Morgoth until Thangorudrim itself be overthrown." End quote. When Tuor was 16, he was strong and valiant, and he had learned much over his short life. Soon Hithlum became too dangerous for the elves to stay in, and Anile hoped to move the company southwards, but they were attacked by Easterlings. And Tuor was captured, and he was enslaved by Lorgon, chief of the Easterlings. A thrall, Tuor remained for 3 years, being tormented and abused by the Easterlings, until at last he made his escape. He returned to the caves of Androth, becoming a lone outlaw, and he searched for Anon in Geleth, the gate of the Noldor, for it was by that path Anile wished to journey away south. But Tuor would not find the gate he sought. Ulmo, the Vala of the Water, had great plans for Tuor, so one day while Tuor was alone in thought, Ulmo sent forth an overflowing stream, and put into Tuor's heart a desire of the sea, and so Tuor followed where the stream flowed, going out to the arid Lomen, where beyond lay the land of Nevrast and the sea. There the stream flowed into an archway of rocks, and Tuor was dismayed, for that path was dark. Now it so happened that 2 elves now came out of the shadows, and were surprised to find Tuor there. Perceiving that he was one of the Edain of Hador, they spoke to him, naming themselves Gelmir and Arminas, and they told him the archway before him was the Anon in Geleth, and they led him down the path before returning to their own mission. Tuor would then walk in darkness until he came to the Cirith Niniach. Upon coming to the Firth of Drengist, Tuor heard the cry of the seagulls, and he followed the sound to the great sea Belagar, and into the land of Nevrast, and there he would stay for a time. When the gulls passed to the south, Tuor too turned to the south, and he came upon the abandoned city of Vinyamar. There he wandered the halls, and he came upon a set of armor left behind by Torgon at Ulmo's bidding, and Tuor then took the armor, for a sudden desire told him to. Tuor then walked outside the halls of Vinyamar to the shore as a great storm approached, and then Ulmo himself arose from the water, and he gave to Tuor a quest to warn Torgon of the impending doom of the Noldor, and Tuor accepted this burden. But at this meeting a love of the sea was forever ingrained into Tuor's heart. Tuor would fall asleep as the storm raged on, bringing Voronwë, an elf of Gondolin, to the shore. When Tuor awoke, he saw Voronwë and greeted him, much to the surprise of Voronwë, for the knowledge of Ulmo came to Tuor. Tuor would tell of his errand to find Torgon, given to him by Ulmo, and Voronwë, astounded by Tuor's words, would tell him that no man or elf not of the hidden kingdom had a right to be led to Gondolin, to which Tuor said, quote, "But as for my right to seek Torgon, I am Tuor, son of Huor, and kin of Hurin, whose names Torgon will not forget, and I seek also by the command of Ulmo. Will Torgon forget that which he spoke to him of old? Remember that the last hope of the Noldor cometh from the sea. Or again, when peril is nigh, one shall come from Nevras to warn thee. I am he that should come, and I am arrayed thus in the gear that was prepared for me." End quote. With these words Voronwë relented, and would take Tuor on the path to Gondolin. The road was long and difficult, for winter was now in full swing, and the path was covered by the ruin of Glaurung, who earlier that year destroyed the kingdom of Nargothrond. At the pools of Ivrin, Tuor and Voronwë would see a man with a black sword run through the path, crying for Finduilas. Tuor would not know that this was his cousin, Turin, son of Hurin. The path, too, was surrounded by orc companies who were all about the land after the sack of Nargothrond, and so Tuor and Voronwë went slowly and secretly to the encircling mountains. There they went through a tunnel that would lead them to the gate, where they were stopped by the guards. Tuor would then tell the guards of his errand to the king and his kin, and Elemakel would lead Tuor and Voronwë through the 7 gates of Gondolin, and there riders came forth, led by Ecthelion, who halted them. He spoke words to Tuor, telling him that no stranger who enters shall leave save by death, to which Ulmo, speaking through Tuor, said, "Speak not ill boding. If the messenger of the Lord of Waters go by that door, then all those who dwell here will follow him. Lord of the Fountains, hinder not the messenger of the Lord of the Waters." End quote. The elves were all astounded by the words of Tuor, and even more so when the cloak of Tuor fell, revealing the armor. Armor these elves knew Torgon lay in Nevras until Ulmo sent his messenger. Thus Tuor would be led to Gondolin, into the tower of Torgon. There Torgon sat with his daughter Idril on his left, and nephew Maeglin on his right. Tuor thus spoke the words of Ulmo, telling Torgon to abandon Gondolin and take his people down to the sea, for the curse of Mandos was soon to be full wrought. Torgon would hear these words, but he had grown prideful in his city, for it was alike to Tirion in Valinor, and he trusted in its secrecy, and to Maeglin he listened, for his nephew counseled against the words of Tuor. Torgon thus decreed that Gondolin shall not be abandoned, but Torgon knew the doom of the Noldor, and he feared treachery, so he ordered the entrance to the encircling mountains be blocked up, and none shall ever set foot outside the mountains again. Tuor thus stayed in the city, and he was held in great honor by Torgon, for he loved Hurin and Huor, and he forgot not the final words of Huor, that from Huor and Torgon a new star will arise. Tuor would grow mighty in lore and wisdom from the elves, becoming lordly, and soon Idril's heart turned to him, and the two would fall in love. Thus, 7 years after Tuor first entered Gondolin, Torgon permitted Tuor to marry Idril, and all in the city were happy except for Maeglin, who secretly coveted Idril for himself, a dark desire that only ever grew more. Around this time, Hurin was released from captivity by Morgoth, and after many journeys came near to the encircling mountains. And he cried out to Torgon, begging to be let in, to which Torgon would refuse at first. But feeling pity in his heart, he sent the eagles forth to find Hurin, but the shadow of Morgoth prevented it. Morgoth now knew the general location of Gondolin, but he still could not discover it. 503 years in the First Age, Eärendil, the son of Tuor and Idril, was born, and there was joy throughout the city. But in Idril's heart she sensed a growing shadow, and this warning prompted her to begin building a new secret passage out of the northern reaches of the encircling mountains. To few she would trust with this labor, and so it passed that Maeglin knew of it not. In 509, Maeglin, who often ventured outside the encircling mountains to mine, had gathered a small party, but outside the mountains they were attacked by orc scouts, and Maeglin was captured. In Angband he suffered torture unbearable, and so he pleaded with Morgoth the location of Gondolin and aiding in its downfall for his life and the hand of Idril, to which Morgoth readily agreed to. Whether he would keep his end of the bargain or not mattered little to Morgoth. Maeglin would return to Gondolin as though nothing were wrong, smiling about what was to come. The shadow on Idril's heart grew ever more as the doom of the Noldor was to be fulfilled. The next year Morgoth now had his forces all prepared, and he sent them forth. All of the Gondolindrim were awaiting the rising of the sun and the start of the Gates of Summer feast. Red lights would rise, not out of the east, but in the north, as great hordes of orcs came spilling over the mountains, led by the Balrogs, Gothmog chief amongst them, upon the backs of dragons, like the elves on horseback. Quick Torgon was to prepare the defenses of Gondolin, gathering the 12 houses for their stand. The elves fought valiantly, but the host of the orcs proved too great and terrible, and they broke through the walls of the city, setting it ablaze. As the city began to fall, Tuor looked to keep Idril and Eärendil safe, and he ran to them. At this time, Maeglin had now set his hands upon Idril, and sought to throw Eärendil from the wall. But Idril would fight back, using all of her strength, but to no avail. Tuor then came upon them, and in a rage he battled Maeglin, who too fought fiercely, but Tuor was the stronger one, and he seized Maeglin, throwing him from the wall, and he hit Amon-Gwareth 3 times ere his end. The forces of Gondolin were pushed back with great losses on both sides. In the square of the king, Lord Ecthelion duelled Gothmog in a great fight that wounded Ecthelion, but he charged at Gothmog, and with his horned helm pierced the Balrog's hide, and sent them both into the fountain, where Ecthelion drowned, and Gothmog's fire forever quenched. Torgon was now in despair, for he saw that his pride and folly now brought about the destruction of his city and his people. So he relinquished all authority, and told the Noldor to follow Tuor and Idril, for he shall remain in Gondolin. Much of the royal guard would stay behind with Torgon in his tower, where Torgon's last stand would be. As Tuor and Idril organized the flight of the survivors, they saw from afar the collapse of Torgon's tower, and more sorrow was added to the Noldor. With as many survivors as they could muster, Tuor and Idril led them through the secret path Idril had prepared. They came through the Eagle's Cleft in the northern mountains, and there they were surrounded by orcs and a Balrog, for Morgoth had set guards all around the encircling mountains, and to the Noldor it seemed that their doom was at hand. But Glorfindel stood before the Balrog, challenging him to a battle over the pass. There, Glorfindel forced the Balrog to fall off the mountainside, but the fallen Maya grabbed onto Glorfindel's hair, pulling him into the abyss with him. The orcs in fear fled, but all were destroyed by the eagles. So the Gondolindrim would survive, and it would be long before Morgoth learned of this. Flying away southwards, the Noldor were sorrowful, as they buried Glorfindel and sang many psalms to honor the fallen. Tuor would sing of the coming of Ulmo to the shores of Nevrast, and the sea longing in his heart returned. Tuor and Idril led their people to Sirion, where they joined the remnant of Doriath. As Tuor felt old age upon him, he and Idril took a boat out to the sea, and it is said they came at last to Valinor, and Tuor's fate was sundered from men, as he became accounted as one of the Eldar. And that ends the tale of the Fall of Gondolin. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Feel free to like and subscribe for more content, and please let me know how I can better improve these videos. Thanks, and as the elves say, Namarie.